Welcome back to Calgary City Council. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mayor. On the roll, Councillor Clark.
Present.
Councillor Dhaliwal. Councillor Dhaliwal, are you online? Councillor Jameson.
Present.
Councillor Johnston.
Here.
Councillor Kelly.
Present.
Councillor McLean. Councillor McLean.
I'm here.
Councillor Pantazopoulos. Councillor Schmidt. Councillor Tyers. Here. Councillor Ward.
Here.
Councillor Wyness. Here. Councillor Wyness, are you online?
Yes, here.
Thank you. Councillor Ewell.
Here.
Councillor Atkinson. Councillor Chabot.
Present.
And Mayor Farkas.
Present.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, we are still on the public hearing. We're going to go to panel 9. I'm going to call a series of names, and if I call your name, please come on up, or if you're on the line, be prepared to jump in when your name is called again. So do we have Latoja Campbell Walters with us? Storm Purdy? Yuri Rogosian? Spencer Andresen? Natalie Robertson? Great, so if I called your name, please come on up. You have 5 minutes, and we can jump right into it with you, Latoja.
Thank you, Mayor Farkas. Good afternoon to you and members of council. My name is Latosia Campbell Walters. I'm a registered planner, principal of Sparks Planning Group, a member of Calgary Planning Commission, speaking today in my personal capacity. I came to this as a new Calgarian, as an immigrant, supporting small builders through engagement, working directly with communities, navigating change in real time. That vantage point gives me a clear or somewhat understanding of how the system is functioning on the ground. I also am associated with many immigrant community. I see the pressure people are under to find housing they can afford in communities they feel connected to. Calgary is on track to reach 2 million residents. The question before you is whether what you're putting forward today is in a position that will manage growth well or defer the consequences. At its core, this is not just a zoning decision. It's about affordability, sustainability, and how Calgary evolves its established communities. Let me be direct. Citywide rezoning was not as carefully calibrated as it should have been. It was applied too broadly, without enough precision around where capacity exists, where infrastructure is ready, and how change is experienced at the neighborhood level. That created real problems around fit, predictability, participation, and public confidence. But this is part of a learning process. And the learning only matters if we use it well. The risk now is we respond to one imperfect approach with another, without fully understanding what is working, what is not, and what the consequences are. This is not just a zoning issue. It's a system alignment issue where policy, infrastructure, approvals, and engagement are not yet working together. Many speakers have talked about that. The evidence of what we have before us shows some important things. It's working in some respect, but maybe not evenly. Uptake has concentrated in areas, and I'm talking uptake for blanket rezoning, in areas with transit, amenities, and infrastructure, and has been limited elsewhere. That's not failure in its entirety. This is insight. It tells us where the approach is effective and where it might need to be replaced or refined. At the same time, community concerns are real, and we must listen to them. Residents are not rejecting housing. They're asking how it fits on their block, on their streets, over time. And when this is not clear, uncertainty becomes resistance. Repeal also has its consequences. It would return much of the city to low-density permission, limit housing choice, and reintroduces longer time frames, higher costs, and greater uncertainty. We heard that a lot today. And that uncertainty directly affects whether housing gets built at all. There are broad implications. If we do not make room for growth within existing communities, growth shifts outwards, increasing infrastructure costs, expanding onto new land, and underutilizing existing infrastructure, an impact we're very familiar with. Council should fully understand the financial and long-term implications of that shift. This is not just planning and all the other issues, it's also a sustainability issue. And it makes affordability much easier when we start to think about it on a holistic level. So the issue before Council is not whether the policy was perfect. It is not. But repeal on its own risks repeating some mistakes, and in fact, maybe reverse. My position, refine or replace, not a repeal, Council. Think carefully. We need to move from a broad approach to a more targeted one.
Thank you, Latoja. Unfortunately, you're at time, but please stay up there. With the rest of the panel, there may be questions for you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have Storm Purdy with us?
Thank you. Your Worship, first of all, I want to say thank you for having the dinner break, because Ruth Melchior is a hard act to follow, and she was right before this session in the break. My name is Storm Purdy, and I'm here, actually I was here approximately about a year ago in opposition to a massive density injection into the community of Richmond Park, where they brought 3,000 people into a 10-acre site. They piggybacked on 75-year old infrastructure, all the water lines, no transportation egress, elimination of valuable park space. They went from 6 acres down to less than 1, I think it is. And it was a massive project that happened in our community. For those of you that don't know, Richmond Park is sandwiched in between 2 overdeveloped communities of Killarney and Marteloup. And those have been destroyed by the congested infrastructure and dangerous streets and densification that has happened in those neighborhoods. Some of the proponents of this blanket rezoning that happened a year ago, 2 years ago, I apologize, herald affordability is the goal. And from my observation, it is clear that the only winners in this whole equation are the developers. And if you do the math, and I just, on the back of an envelope, do the math, you buy a single-family home for $750,000, you take 2 years to develop a 4-plex with secondary suites associated to it, you have limited parking, you put about $1.2 million into it, that gets you to a total of about $2 million. You sell the 4 units for $1 million each, and you walk away with $2 million in your pocket. That's not affordable for the people that are actually buying those properties. That's the simple math. What the community is left with is 4+ cars, extra parking in the community, increased traffic in the section, minimal green space because they've gone gunnel to gunnel on the property, and a strained water and sewage system that can't handle that additional volume of density. So the question is, why am I here? Well, with the engagement that I had with the City of Calgary departments over the last 3 years related to the Viscount Bennett property development, I had many discussions with senior members of the Waterworks, Mobility, and Parks, and some of the findings that I had were scary. In Waterworks, they said that they had no idea of the condition of the water pipes in the community. No idea of the condition. They could profess that they knew the capacity, but they had no idea what was in the condition. These are 75-year-old pipes. Transportation and Mobility had no idea how to handle the additional blanket rezoning volumes that were going to be coming into the neighborhoods. The traffic impacts were, they used the words, we're still learning. Parking, they said, well, we'll absorb it into the community. And even one senior traffic engineer told me that by 2035, they expect chaos in these communities. So my point about bringing this forward and using that as an example is that prior to the blanket rezoning debacle of the last couple of years, the city conducted a fairly comprehensive process striking the local area plans. You guys have heard about it. We've heard it from a number of other constituents. They studied the infrastructure, they studied the traffic patterns, congestion, they figured out where properties could be developed, where it was appropriate to be developed. They worked with the community to be able to do that, and it was a measured, sustainable, and supported growth that was in the communities. I'm not sure why we can't go back to that. So, as was said earlier in the session, you weren't sure whether you were in favor or against. I am in favor, and I strongly recommend that this council repeal the blanket rezoning and come back forward with something that's a better plan. I don't know what that is. I'm just lending my voice to say that I'm against the blanket rezoning, and I would like to hear it being repealed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here with us. Do we have Yuri Rogozin? Come on up.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Yuri Rogozin. Yes, I'm a small builder from Calgary, local builder, originally moved from Ukraine about 11 years ago, and I'm really happy and proud to be part of the people of the community who is trying to make Calgary a better place. I truly love our city, and I'm doing all I can in my capacity to make it even better. I think it's nothing new. It's been said multiple times, the affordability. Of course, that's what the gentleman said before. There's no near, as a builder, I know there's nowhere near those numbers are valid for $1 million profits. That's not true. And in fact, there are areas where those numbers are much more slim and much more affordable. So talking about affordability, we see more and more young people struggling to get affordable housing to the extent where they even try to seek outside. We've listened to, and I was listening to other presenters and students who were struggling and thinking to relocate to other towns, to other provinces, or maybe even abroad to US, where maybe there's a better wages or whatever the reason might be. So I think the key for the Calgary is still trying to keep the young population and grow steadily, affordably. If we are expecting those 2 million, they need to live somewhere. At the same time, I want to say that densification is not by all means. Me as a homeowner, I'm not happy as well for having blanket RCG. I don't think it makes sense to have RCG blankly for every single property in town. With that said, I think it has to be very distinct and planned for which areas, which streets, which communities, which areas of the city. And I believe, and I saw those intentions from the city where some of the lots were rezoned to RCG. At the same time, some of them got HGO, HGOs, like they like to call. I think there were first steps to have those strategic rezoning where you may consider those arteries, those bus routes, LRT stations. Somebody was talking about Elbow Drive. Actually, I have a project on Elbow Drive that I'm going to develop. Before I was doing single-family homes, and I tried now my attempt into those townhomes development on Elbow. If you were asking me, I think that's the best, or one of the best streets in Calgary to do that. It's a wide street, wide walkways. City is asking us as a builder to make them even wider. to improve infrastructure there. There's bus route right there, goes to downtown. There's walking distance to Heritage LRT. There's walking distance to Rocky View, to Chinook Mall. I mean, we all Calgarians probably know what I'm talking about. I don't see much concern on that street. It will not affect Calvin Grove or Kingsland deep inside, where people could live nice and happy in the quiet streets. Whereas Elwood Drive, it's by no means it's quiet. You just it's asking to densify, and many more streets like that. So what I want to say is we should not be choosing, hopefully, or maybe between just removing blanket rezoning, but maybe do more strategic decision. Maybe those HGO streets, and my permit has been approved, so I'm not saying let's keep my development running. No, I think that there was a thought process in the city where they decided, okay, HGO seems to be a very specific, distinct areas and streets. So I would think that those are the first to consider to be maybe capped as a potentially applicable for multi-residential, and then certainly implement something for those blanket RGO or RCG, sorry, that may not be or should not be blanked throughout the whole city. Maybe also a little bit more strategic in that regards. And I will just say that I think if we have, if we will have to transition back to case-by-case rezoning, it will certainly distract a lot of smaller builders like I am
Thank you.
from taking
Unfortunately, you're at
those
time.
opportunities.
I'm
Thank you.
sorry to be strict on the
No,
time limit. I
it's
just
only
want to be
fair.
fair to everybody.
Thank you, absolutely.
Thanks. Next, do we have Spencer and Joyson with us? Thank you. Coming up.
I'm going to lift this table. I saw someone do it earlier, and it looked helpful. Hello, City Council and Administration. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm here to speak as a registered architect and contractor focusing on delivering alternative housing like backyard suites and secondary suites. My company, Havenworks, operates within the developed area in Calgary. I'm also a former city employee, having worked as a project manager with facilities management and as a senior project manager with Calgary Municipal Land Corporation. Having worked with the land use bylaw in some detail in my professional career, experiencing the zoning shift in real time, there are several features that I think can be improved as Council grapples with modifications to IP 2007. I'm neither in support nor opposition of repealing the blanket rezoning. Rather, I would like to highlight specific recommendations that I believe will strengthen the city's aim to optimize the land use bylaw for Calgarians, whether the blanket rezoning remains or not. My recommendations are intended to support a middle path, refining what works while addressing what doesn't. Given that Council is already proposing textual amendments, this is precisely the moment to refine, not discard, the most effective elements introduced in 2024. Firstly, my recommendation is to continue to allow secondary suites and backyard suites on the same parcel, continue to define secondary suites as permitted use, and consider including backyard suites as a permitted use across all low-density residential districts. The moderate amendment in 2024 to allow backyard suites and secondary suites in combination created what is, objectively, the most subtle and unintrusive way of increasing density in the inner city. Moreover, with the certainty provided to homeowners by having a secondary and backyard suites as permitted uses, homeowners can pursue owner-developer projects with greater confidence without discretionary hurdles. Secondly, my recommendation is to increase the allowable floor areas for backyard suites to be at least equivalent to secondary suites, or otherwise allow up to 45% parcel coverage in combination with the primary dwelling unit. The maximum floor area for a backyard suite in both the previous and current iterations is 75 square meters, with a further 10% increase at the discretion of the Development Authority. In contrast, the maximum floor area for a secondary suite is 100 square meters, with the same 10% increase at the discretion of the Development Authority for a maximum of 110. This is nearly 300 square feet more floor area for what is effectively the same typology. Moreover, in comparison to larger municipalities across the country, allowable floor areas for backyard suites in Calgary are on the smaller side. More homeowners would construct backyard suites if more floor area were allowed. While not achievable on all lot types and sizes, there are many properties where this would be suitable. Thirdly, my recommendation is to shift away from using maximum floor areas towards using maximum building coverages to allow multi-level living spaces without increasing parcel coverage. Increased floor areas for backyard suites are possible with minimal increase in parcel coverage by allowing for living spaces on 2 stories. This would have little impact on adjacent properties since backyard suites are in most cases already located above a detached private garage. More flexibility in design and configuration would unlock new possibilities for many non-standard or irregularly shaped parcels. Fourth, my recommendation is to allow floor area increases as an incentive when backyard suites are designed for accessibility. Where homeowners want to develop backyard suites to age in place, space is often a prohibitive constraint when designing for universal accessibility. Increased corridor widths, increased bathroom areas, and even space for installation of residential lifts significantly reduce living space available in a backyard suite that is already limited to 75 square meters. Lastly, I recommend that Council address bottlenecks in the regulatory and delivery process by directing administration to optimize the permitting process and expand the number of indemnified contractors to increase availability for small-scale inner-city development. As identified by the Backyard Suite Incentive Program, a significant capital cost for inner-city development is work required to upgrade existing utilities. But cost is not the only issue. Where indemnified contractors are required to complete utility work outside property lines, only a handful of them regularly bid on these smaller projects. And in some cases, they're in such high demand that they're often booked months or even years in advance. When projects cannot be undertaken and completed within a reasonable time frame due to regulatory choke points, it deters homeowners from pursuing development regardless of how the land use bylaw is structured. In conclusion, it's my hope that the recommendations I put forward will spark Council's interest in considering ways in which the land use bylaw, whatever shape it takes, can make room for responsible and incremental densification of the city. Prudent and practical developments, including secondary suites and backyard suites, will no doubt support a brighter future for this city. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Do we have Natalie Robertson with us in the audience? Or on the line? No? Okay, we will jump into questions for this panel. We have Councillor Johnston up.
My question's for Mr. Spencer there.
Andreessen?
Andreessen, sorry. You mentioned the bottleneck and regulatory issues with potentially with the city and for us to give direction. Do you have any specific ideas of what direction we should be giving to administration to make things more efficient?
I think making backyard suites permitted uses would go a long way because if a project meets the requirements outlined in the bylaw and they are a permitted use, then there's no need for additional feedback from the community, essentially.
Okay. Anything else you can think of?
The indemnified contractors is a big deal. It's a big problem. I don't know how much council is familiar with it, but in order to build a backyard suite, you often have to build or install new water and sewer services for the property. Those have to be connected to the mains that are in the street right-of-ways. And the work outside of the property line can't be completed unless it's done by an indemnified, pre-qualified contractor with the City of Calgary. I don't recall which department that indemnified list is with, but in a lot of cases, they're indemnified to do large-scale developments in greenfield spaces, and a lot of the larger companies don't actually want to bid on these smaller projects. I think it probably doesn't have the same, they don't have the business model for it. So I think opening up or increasing the number of indemnified contractors would reduce significantly the time that it takes to actually get the project started, even once you have all your permits in place.
Do we currently have that program with the city for identified contractors?
There is the indemnified contractors are they're pre-qualified. So there's a list. They go through what I understand is a rigorous pre-qualification process in order to have indemnification agreements to do that work.
Rightfully so.
Yep.
Do you think it's more of awareness for contractors that it exists and it's something they can be a part of? Or like, should we be doing a better job bringing in contractors like this?
I think there are probably a lot of other contractors that may have the qualifications to do the work, but, and I can't, to be quite frank, I can't speak to what the process is to actually get onto that indemnified list. All I know is that the list is, I think there might be 20 contractors in total in the entire city, and there's literally only a handful of them that will ever bid on smaller scale projects like that.
Exactly. Expanding the contractor bid list, I think, would be huge. Is there anything else you can think of? Because you've got a good knowledge base of here and there and everywhere. So I just...
Yeah, there are a couple of things related to the regulatory process in terms of streamlining it. One would be in instances where this relates also to utilities, but NMAX will often have to do adjustments or increases in their utilities for these types of projects. But they also, if anyone's sort of walked through a typical lane or alley in Calgary with overhead lines, if it's on one side of the property and you're trying to, or on one side of the alley and you're trying to build a backyard suite on that side of the lane, there are particular setbacks from NMAX, that NMAX requires that are separate from the land use bylaw setback requirements. The problem is that there seems to be a gap in the distribution process during the development permit stage where NMAX in some cases doesn't seem to really get engaged. And so it's helpful to know at the beginning of a project what NMAX's response is going to be to their own infrastructure and how far away from the infrastructure you have to be. And it's not exactly obvious at the beginning of a project what the overlay is between that and the land use bylaw regulations in terms of setbacks.
Right. And sir, I can't remember, are a lot of those suggestions within your submission?
I did not. I was writing a speech to be 5 minutes long, and I did not have time to outline all of those, but I can certainly provide you with more information.
I would love to see that. And any more that you want to add to that, I would love to
I'd be happy to
be a part of the solution. So thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Johnston. Over to Deputy Mayor Schmidt.
Yes, Mr. Andresen, for you as well. Perhaps for just for our benefit, can you go into a bit more depth around how having something be permitted versus discretionary enables individual homeowners to be able to build this product?
Yeah, for sure. It's a little bit different pre and post blanket rezoning because a lot of the stuff that was previously permitted just sort of automatically became discretionary, or the scale of projects in RCG are by their nature discretionary. So you know, the eightplexes that everyone is sort of complaining about, those are typically discretionary permits anyways. But the difference between the two is that if under the land use bylaw, a use, for example, a backyard suite or a secondary suite, or you know, in the older paradigm when you had RC1, RC2, there were specific uses. A single family contextual residence would be considered permitted. So there's a very long list of requirements that are outlined very clearly and explicitly in the bylaw as to what that particular use needs to have, or particularities around scale of entrances, porches, all that kind of thing, in order to be considered contextual. And then if they meet all of those requirements and they are a permitted use, then what typically happens is that the advertising period is more of a formality because the development authority automatically has to support a project that meets the permitted use and follows all the rules of the bylaw. When it becomes discretionary, it opens up essentially scrutiny to the wider public. So, and I'm not trying to suggest that not having that process is a good thing, or that engaging with the public is not a good thing. I think it is a good thing. But as it relates to the types of projects that I'm advocating for, like backyard suites and secondary suites, there doesn't seem to be any real value in having a backyard suite as a discretionary use over and against a permitted use, because the regulatory framework for what a backyard suite is and how it can be constructed is already pretty explicit in the land use bylaw. So it just seems to add an additional layer of bureaucracy that you have to sort of go through, or homeowners have to go through in the development permit process.
And it sounds to me like it adds an additional layer of uncertainty for everybody. Because if you have a permitted use for something like that, then we have a strong set of rules and guidelines that everybody is clear about from the beginning.
Yep.
Not only the person who's building it, but the people living around there as well will know where the door has to go,
Yep.
what all these things
Correct.
need to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your other suggestion around instead of the parcel size, increasing the FAR of a backyard suite, I think is what you were saying, correct?
Yeah, more or less. I think the RCG, when we transitioned to RCG, whether it was RCG or RC1 or R1 or R2 even, I think, the maximum building coverage, so the total building area on any given parcel was 45% of the parcel area. That's still the same under RCG when it comes to these types of uses. So it seems like an artificial limiter on the size of a backyard suite, because you could conceivably build up to 45% of building coverage. You'd still be meeting that 45% building coverage, and it doesn't change the density for the neighborhood, right? You still have an additional accessory residential unit, whether it's 75 square meters or 100 square meters.
So then your suggestion is that you may see better outcomes for accessibility and things
For
like
sure.
that without actually changing how much of the lot it's taking up. Is that what you're saying? Am I hearing that correctly?
Well, if it totally depends on the building coverage up to 45% totally depends on what the building coverage is on the existing dwelling unit, or whatever the primary dwelling unit is. So if you allowed up to a certain coverage, and this is done in other jurisdictions, Edmonton and Toronto and others, Vancouver, if you allow up to that building coverage, you probably would see backyard suites that are larger in floor area or overall building area. But the shift is subtle, because right now under the land use bylaw, it describes a maximum floor area, but the floor area is not actually a defined term in the land use bylaw, whereas building coverage is, or building area. So if you shifted it, you would actually see, I think you would see a lot more variety in the types of backyard suites that could be constructed, because even if you can meet the parking stall requirements on a property, you'd have other different typologies of backyard suites that would allow for example, at-grade living space, which is typically avoided right now because you want to maximize your total floor area on sort of one floor plate, which ends up being above a detached garage. But you could imagine an example where you'd have a single family or a single car garage. A portion of that main floor could be living space, and then you could have additional living space above that was contiguous, and it wouldn't impact the parcel coverage, and it wouldn't impact the density in the community. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, it does. And then just from your personal experience in building so many of these projects, and when it comes to words, like community character or changing the street and the typical concerns that we see around, say, a fourplex with 4 secondary suites, what has been your experience with community feedback and interactions when it comes to this type of built form? Have you found it to be and again, not asking you for exact data, but just from your experience doing this, less contentious, more neutral, do you have anything around that?
Yeah, the most recent backyard suite that I completed was in Haysboro on Elbow Drive, which everyone is citing tonight. And during the construction process, there was, I don't recall having any negative feedback. Everyone that walked by during the construction process, engaged conversation with me, was very positive and thought, oh, this would be great. I'd love to do this, right? And usually during the circulation period for a development permit, the development authority will gather feedback, comments from the community. And for that particular project, there were no negative comments that were provided, and there were positive comments that were provided. So I actually think that typology is a bit of an anomaly because it seems to be less of a contentious issue than some of the other development types that are allowed under the RCG. The other thing I would say is that backyard suites, there's essentially no real difference between having a three-car garage in a backyard versus a three-car garage with living space above it. In fact, people often forget that in a lot of cases we complain that our alleyways are unsafe and unsupervised, and with something like a backyard suite, the typology like a backyard suite, you actually have additional surveillance on these otherwise sort of neglected thoroughfares. So,
and then my final question is there a possibility, do you think, for working in, through your experience again, that to have certain types of lots with secondary suites and backyard suites, is that something in your experience that you've seen to have been feasible as well?
Absolutely. The project that I just referenced, we are actually in the process of suiting the house and the basement into two separate units. So it's essentially a 3-unit project. And we are also able to provide 3 parking stalls on the site. So there are ways, I'm not saying that it's appropriate in every single case, and I think a nuanced and considered building coverage maximum would mitigate some of those concerns, but on a 25-foot wide lot, you're not going to fit a 3-car garage anyways, so you're sort of limited by the site constraints more than you are by the regulatory framework.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Councillor Chabot, please.
Same person. Thanks, Mr. Andresen, for being here. So I guess what I'm a bit challenged by what you're saying is that prior to RCG, backyard suites were discretionary, and it was an or situation, not an and situation.
With respect to secondary suites.
Yeah, so either a basement suite or a backyard suite. RCG introduced the and component.
Correct.
Albeit discretionary, correct?
Secondary suites are, as I understand them, permitted uses under RCG. Backyard suites remain discretionary.
Discretionary, yeah. So now, if we're going to go back, I'm trying to rationalize why we would want to go only, part way back and then go actually permitted for a backyard suite. Whilst you may not have had any negative input, I can tell you that in my communities, I've had a lot of feedback prior to RCG for backyard suites. And the biggest argument was they already have a basement suite. So to go from a basement suite with a backyard suite as a permitted use would be a hard sell in my communities, just from my previous experience. So I'm trying to understand why there's such a big objection to discretionary for a backyard suite as an and option for a basement suite.
Yeah. I think a misnomer, misunderstanding as it relates to the comment and feedback gathered during the development process is people can submit comments and feedback, but they have to be specifically related to the merits of the actual application as it relates to the land use bylaw and the regulations. So the fact that someone may not want an additional accessory unit, which I'm not suggesting that someone's not entitled to that opinion. But that wouldn't register as a negative component or piece of feedback as it relates to that discretionary permit. The discretionary permit would be, it would be related to things that are typically considered variances or relaxations, right? So someone wants to build a larger backyard suite than they probably should, and they're encroaching on the setback, or they're asking for a relaxation on a setback. When you get into a discretionary permit territory, that's when neighbors' feedback can actually have an impact on the shape that thing takes.
Okay. However, even on a permitted perspective, if there's a relaxation on any of the rules, it's still appealable.
If there's a relaxation on a permitted use, the development authority has the discretion to approve or reject it. And typically, when it's considered a permitted use, like the example would be a contextual single detached dwelling, if it doesn't meet what's explicitly written out in the land use bylaw, they typically don't allow you to submit it or approve it as contextual. So they may relax it, but they would be doing that as a non-contextual or non-permitted use.
And it's subject to an appeal, right?
It would be in that case, correct? Yeah. But again, the appeal, a neighbor appealing on because they think it's too many.
Oh, I agree. That's not planning rationale.
Yeah.
And that's why I question why there's such a concern about going discretionary, because unless it's for sound planning rationale and you have justification as to why you want to oppose it, it's essentially it's deemed acceptable or permitted, even though it's discretionary, as long as there's no relaxation. So why the concern? Is it because of the potential for an appeal?
It takes longer.
And somebody can appeal it and drag it out?
I mean, it's the fact that they can appeal it is, I've actually been to the SDAB building a contextual single detached dwelling. So the fact that you get an approval for even a permitted use doesn't prevent someone from filing an appeal, like literally submitting an appeal on it. It usually dies in the water when it goes to SDAB, but it doesn't stop.
Be accepted if it's a permitted use. It's not appealable.
Correct. Well, I'd love you to join me at the SDB when that happens. You're absolutely correct. What the land use bylaw is very, very clear. When it's a permitted use and it meets all the requirements of the bylaw, it's approved. The city doesn't really, the development authority doesn't really have any grounds. And when they approve something that's discretionary, this is something that I also find interesting. When they approve something that is discretionary, they are actually obligated to support that development because they've supported it, they've approved it. Yep. So I'm the only reason I'm suggesting that backyard suites be changed to permitted is because it's a very definable typology, and it doesn't seem, it seems like it bogs down the permit process in a way that's unnecessary.
And insofar as overlooking and those kind of issues, you can still address that even at a permitted stage.
Yeah, I mean the
frosting of windows on side.
Yeah, the land use bylaw is pretty clear about building heights, setbacks, and overlooking neighbors. And a good file manager in the development authority is usually looking for these sorts of things, right? If it's a window on the side property lines, they typically want it to be at a certain height or to be frosted.
Or the local councillor at least weighing in on his opinion.
Sure. Yeah.
Not that I've ever done that. Okay, thanks. No further questions for me. Thank you for being here.
I was thinking if you're going to drag Councillor Chabot to SDAB, I think you're threatening him with a good time.
Yeah.
Just so you know, I've been there, done that, 2.5 years.
Thank you, Your Worship.
I think you got the T-shirt too.
I'll be very brief here.
Okay.
I just wanted to thank this panel. This was incredible, and I would like to second Councillor Johnston's request. If you would forward us your analysis, your thoughts about how best to move forward. Not all of us did run on repeal. But I ran on amend, and not being really provided the opportunity or time to do that, as much information as I can gather as quickly as possible, it would be quite effective, and I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we will now move to panel 10. So I'm going to list out some names here. Do we have Pat Guillemot, Ken Goosen, Richard Belzil, Catherine Williams, or
Yes.
Peter Collins with us?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Catherine. We'll come to you shortly here. All right, Pat, do we have you?
Yes.
Oh, sorry about that. Pat, please go ahead. You have 5 minutes. Pat, we're happy to hear from you as part of the public hearing now. Or that might not be Pat. Is that Catherine speaking?
It is Catherine. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. We'll get to you in just a moment here.
Okay.
I don't think Pat is with us, so we will go to Ken, please.
Good evening, Mayor Farkas and councillors. Thank you very much for encouraging this process. Thank you to all the Calgarians who are participating. It is important to hear all the diverse voices and opinions on this issue. We are a civil society, and I can appreciate that participating in these opportunities doesn't automatically, excuse me, ensure our own personal perspective represents the decision to be made, but I think the majority voice needs to be better respected. This marks my second time in presenting to Council, as well as several presentations to the Subdevelopment Appeal Board, which unfortunately led to a decision contrary to what I and our community were pushing forward for, but that is life. I am in favor of the repeal of the blanket rezoning. Sadly, like many other Calgarians, in the first round of discussions, I truly feel our voices were not heard, and that the process of we, the city, are obliged to give the opportunity for Calgarians to voice their opinion. However, even though the overwhelming voice was in contrary to this, I feel the decision had already been made, primarily, possibly to access the federal government availability of funds, but I can't say that for sure. But as a citizen, that's what I was taking a look at. And that the consultations were a necessary nuisance. I hope we are not going through those motions again. As Councillor Dollywall started off this morning saying, we need to hear the voices, we need to hear the submissions, and we need to respect and consider where they are coming from. I acknowledge that we are in a housing issue and that we as city do need to respond to it. What was decided upon by the previous council was ill-conceived. Blanket rezoning would infer that the same considerations in every community were to take place, but I do not believe that that is the case in practice. If it were truly blanket, then every community should be participating, and that there shouldn't be communities that are disproportionately burdened with the blanket rezoning, and then there are other communities that seem to have a social development vaccine inoculating them from responsibility of participation. When my wife and I bought our house in Rutland Park, the original community was built with various areas of the community with restrictive covenants attached to the individual properties. Well, those covenants don't really mean anything anymore, but unfortunately, unless you go to the law and go into court with lawyers to work through that. But that is what gave us the confidence over 30 years ago to buy in the community that we were in and gave us a feeling of confidence. In my situation, a single detached bungalow directly across the street from ours, our forever home, has been approved for 6 units and 5 suites. That's 11 dwellings, only ever referenced really as 6. This is somewhat disingenuous as we try to navigate the different building dwellings and units and density. Setbacks have been severely reduced, green space has been almost eliminated, numerous mature trees will be removed, the existing green canopy will never be replaced. Exemptions are being provided to the developer to help them build what they would like to build, rather than respecting the nature of the property they have acquired and to plan to build within the reality of that property and publish restrictions as opposed to asking for exemptions. Not once has the developer or the new property owner approached us to discuss their plans. In fact, the disrespect this owner has shown by not abiding by public bylaws regarding snow removal, lawn maintenance, truly speak to one other presenter who discussed the fact that it's more about the financial return than the community within which they're injecting themselves. It has been left to the community residents complaining to 311, which really they've got better things to do in order to get these things taken care of. Now, I realize this is painting all property owners and developers proposing new builds are the same, and that is unfair. I'm sure there are decent folk out there doing their work appropriately, and I applaud them for that. The process, however, is flawed. I am fully supportive of finding solutions that will work. I love the idea of backyard suites and secondary suites. I think that makes sense. And to respect structure plans, established communities, and finding a more progressive and appreciative approach to restrictive covenants. Our community used to have RC1 and RC2 restrictions on future development. Perhaps modest advances on those, maybe doubling of those, might be something to consider rather than going from 1 to 11. I think smarter solutions are out there, and that as our elected representatives on council, you're all smart folk. And you've been brought here, you have been voted in to hear our voices, to represent your community representatives within your wards, and to make solid decisions. I look forward to the opportunity to participate in the next round of community consultation when council and the city come back with a well-thought-out, balanced, and progressive plan that addresses the issue fairly and reasonably, and that is, as impractical as it may be, implemented and enacted in every community within the city of Calgary. I truly believe we all have a role to play, and as much as it may not be where we really want it to be, we still need to do it. Sadly.
Thank you so much, Ken. Unfortunately, you're at time.
Thank you.
But don't go anywhere. We'll have Richard up next. Or sorry, you can sit down, but there may be questions for you from members of council. Or don't go far, I should say. Not literally, yes. I apologize. Richard, take us away, please.
Sure. Your Worship and members of council, thank you for the opportunity to speak. 2 years ago, this council asked the people of Calgary whether they supported blanket rezoning, and the people answered clearly and decisively that they did not. Despite that, the bylaw was passed. Then, during the last municipal election, the issue returned to the forefront, and once again the public spoke, and the message was the same. So I find myself asking, why are we here today, being asked the same question a third time? At some point, consultation stops being consultation and becomes something else. What concerns me is not just the decision itself, but the pattern behind it. When the public expresses a clear view and council proceeds anyway, it gives the impression that consultation is not being used to inform decisions, but to legitimize them after the fact. And that matters because public trust depends on the belief that when council asks for input, its interest is genuine. Now, if this were an isolated case, that would be concerning enough. But it isn't. We see the same pattern in other areas. Take, for example, the water meter replacement program. No one objects to measuring water usage for billing purposes. That's reasonable and it's understood. But the move to collect intraday meter readings is something else entirely. That was not put to the public. It was not part of any meaningful consultation. And yet it is being introduced under the justification of improving customer service. I don't say it to be unkind or disrespectful, but the city is having serious water challenges. You have your hands full managing your water system. Leave me to manage mine. These two issues, land use and water meters, reveal the same underlying approach. Decisions made without a clear mandate, followed by explanations or consultations after the fact, and a gradual expansion of scope beyond what people expected or agreed to. This raises a more fundamental question about the role of council. The city exists in part to manage the balance between citizens to ensure that each person's use of their property does not unreasonably interfere with their neighbors. That system has worked because it is based on clear rules, applied consistently, and understood in advance. But when those rules are changed broadly, without clear public support, or when new and invasive forms of oversight are introduced without consent, that balance begins to break down. And when that happens, people begin to lose confidence, not just in a particular decision, but in the process itself. This is how a city council begins to lose its democratic legitimacy. So I would ask council to consider two things. First, you already have the public's answer on blanket rezoning. You've heard it more than once. There is no need to keep asking the question. And second, be very cautious about extending your reach into areas where no mandate has been given. Whether it's land use or data collection, the principle is the same. In closing, if consultation is to mean anything, it must be respected. If trust is to be maintained, decisions must reflect the will of the people, not work around it. So I would urge you, first, repeal the blanket rezoning bylaw. Let the market decide what housing gets built, where, and at what price. Second, and I'll use a colloquialism, stick to your knitting. Council's role is to regulate the development of housing, not motivate it. If you listen to the public's voice and respect the mandate they give you, Calgary's future can be built on trust, cooperation, and a shared vision of a stable, thriving city. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please don't go far. All right, Catherine, if you're still with us, you have 5 minutes, please.
Yes. Good evening. I didn't really know how I was going to begin this. I wondered if it would be good afternoon. But actually,
I think we have some folks who may not have the live stream on mute, so please make sure.
I've got lots of voices butting in all the time during the last speaker, and so it's very, very disconcerting to speak with people speaking behind you. It's horrible. Anyway, good evening.
Good evening. Please go ahead.
Thank you for allowing me to speak today. Unlike many people who've come here in fear of or in support of what the existing planning is doing to the communities, I am living in one of the communities being impacted, and I would like to address the reality of how the change is impacting life in this community. Most of the communities in Ward 7 have been disproportionately affected by the existing guidelines, while large swathes of the city, more populated by wealthy people, potentially could have been targeted, and they've remained completely untouched because the residents of those communities are protected by restricted covenants, which existed or have been rapidly put in place to protect them permanently when the blanket rezoning issue was raised. I believe the overall intention behind blanket rezoning was probably good. The aim was to densify inner city neighbourhoods and provide affordable spaces for families to live in, to grow up in and put down roots, and the process would result in a wonderful mixed demographic residential area. Unfortunately, I fear the execution of blanket rezoning has faltered, and in my community this is leading to overburdened infrastructure and serious parking problems, among a myriad of other issues that affect the day-to-day lives of existing properties. I would like to give you just one example of one block behind me. 2 new end of Avenue 8 plexes and 3 mid Avenue 8 plexes have been built. 5 homes have been turned into 40 apartments. Approximately 15 bedrooms have turned into around 100, and there are 16 garages. This could mean up to 100 extra cars constantly looking for parking in a small area. There are 4 more residences in the block behind me, which could be turned into multiplex units. This is a common scenario for our whole community. In addition, I'm extremely concerned that different departments of the City Council, like roads and transportation and infrastructure work, they work in silos rather than together in approving these projects, which result in no cohesive vision for the community's future. Recent objections or requests have often been responded to with, "That's not my department, that's not part of planning." It's imperative that all parties be at the table to ensure such relevant aspects as tree cover, parking, utilities and infrastructure are all carefully considered. The type of homes being built do not actually create a mixed demographic. Lower income families were renting the old bungalows and they're being pushed out as landlords want to profit absolutely normally from the huge increase in the value of an old single family home that they have rented out for many years. This means moving the children from their schools and many other repercussions. The new multiplex units are too small. They do not have appropriate storage, yards, or green space. The rents being asked for these places are not affordable for either lower income people, seniors, or even many working professionals. I can attest to this because one of my children has rented a townhouse for 4 years, and not once has there been a baby, child, or senior move into any of the units. Many of the people renting these are moving on after a short lease, and they do not have the time to build community or lay down roots. The vision of a vibrant inner city neighborhood that the city promoted is certainly not the reality. While the original intention was building dense and livable communities with easy access to a variety of amenities, my opinion is that the developers have only focused on maximizing profits, cramming in as many residential units as possible. Based on my experience, I recommend that blanket zoning as it is now be repealed, and administration needs to come up with an alternative and better plan. University District is a great example of a strong community for families, for single working professionals, for students and seniors, with all the shops, services and recreation facilities that are included. They have a lovely community
Catherine,
to live in.
Unfortunately, you're at time, but please.
Okay, I just have one sentence?
Sure, please go ahead. One sentence.
As stated on my councillor's election website, we need to tackle housing affordability while enhancing our community.
Thank you very much, Catherine. We'll go now
Thank
to
you.
Peter, please.
My name is Peter Collins. I live in Mayfair in Ward 11. I'm here to speak in support of the motion to repeal blanket upzoning and to restore the prior land use designations. Most of you in council were elected in part because you pledged to repeal blanket upzoning. I thank the 13 of you who voted in favor of bringing this motion because it's a significant step toward keeping this major election campaign promise. I acknowledge that each of you is required by law to maintain an open mind during the hearing. But unless some new and incontrovertible case is made for maintaining blanket upzoning, supported by reliable data, you're entitled to act in your pledge to repeal blanket upzoning, and I urge you to do so. I've also made a written submission, which you can find starting at page 183 of attachment 14 of your 6,000 plus pages. I won't use my time here today repeating either my written submission or the many good arguments made by others about why repeal of blanket upzoning is the right thing to do. Instead, I wish to make 4 related points. 1, reverting from RCG to prior land use classifications isn't enough. In the future, Council must be much more cautious about approving any application to upzone to RCG. Council must be more mindful of the municipal development plan, which repeatedly speaks about how existing neighborhoods should be treated. The MDP is the highest level statutory plan binding on the city, developed and recently updated after extensive public consultation, and planning actions by the city must be consistent with it. The MDP directs that any redevelopment or intensification in established neighborhoods should reinforce the character, quality, and stability of those neighborhoods, should be done in a manner that is sensitive, compatible, respectful, and complementary to the existing physical patterns and character of the neighborhoods, and not create dramatic contrasts in the physical development pattern. Area structure plans, area redevelopment plans, and more recently, local area plans have all been developed under this MDP framework. Before blanket upzoning, however, the previous council approved 96% of RCG zoning amendment applications, Many of those applications offended the NDP requirements I've cited and applicable LAPs or equivalents, yet the previous council approved them. Spot-up zoning, contrary to the MDP planning framework, is wrong, and I caution and urge council to very carefully consider whether any future RCG application is, in fact, consistent with the MDP and the applicable LAP or equivalent. 2, the planning department has been far too liberal in its approach to relaxations. Any relaxation which results in higher density, less parking, tree removal, or other negative effects contrary to the principles set out in the MDP should be rejected, unless a truly rare and highly compelling case based on unique circumstances exists. Relaxations should not be the side door to procure what the MDP and the zoning bylaw otherwise prohibit. 3, the planning department has been supporting minimum density requirements as part of direct control rezoning applications, done deliberately to create a conflict with restrictive covenants, resulting in their discharge by the courts. Restrictive covenants are a legitimate planning tool, permitted by the Land Titles Act, and are a clear expression by the parties and communities involved regarding the nature of desired development. It's plain wrong for the city to conspire with developers to defeat such agreements, and I urge council going forward to reject any rezoning application which seeks to defeat a restrictive covenant by imposing minimum density requirements. 4, local area plans which were finalized during or after the blanket upzoning need to be redone, as they're premised on a zoning structure which will not exist if blanket upzoning is repealed. I was our community association's representative for the Chinook community's local area plan, and I can assure you that the Chinook LAP would have looked substantially different if RCG were not the baseline zoning. In addition, the entire LAP engagement process needs fundamental restructuring, as it was the appearance of community engagement without in fact listening to affected communities or including or altering the plan to reflect community input and concerns. It was an involuntary ride on a train headed toward the planner's preconceived planning destination. It was not engagement. It was a planning department monologue. In conclusion, repeal of blanket upzoning and restoration of prior zoning is just the start. In the future, council must respect community input and do a much better job of complying with its own MDP. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will go to questions for this panel. Councillor Kelly, please.
Yeah, Mr. Goosen, could I start with you, if you don't mind? Rutland Park, correct? Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
I asked this question of someone earlier, and I wanted to get sort of your take on it as well. So Rutland Park is in one of those donut communities that's sort of built between the 60s and 80s, very similar to most of the Ward 4 communities. We've seen a double-digit percentage decrease, and I took a look at Rutland Park. I can see that you're about 24% less in your population than you were at your peak. Like, I love my neighborhood. It's great. Like, I think it's the best neighborhood in the city. I assume you sort of feel the same way about yours. Neighborhoods change, obviously, and certainly mine has seen a population decrease sort of similarly to yours. I get worried when we start to see that because it's things like schools start to close, things like that. I just wanted to see if in your experience you've experienced anything sort of like that as your neighborhood has changed.
Oh, absolutely. We have a school in the community which has changed purpose a number of times. Sir James Lockheed, and was the all-boys program for a while, and I believe there's nothing happening there right now. I think there are reasonable ways to increase the density, but from one dwelling or two dwellings in a property to 11, I think that's excessive. And so my thought would be my house was registered as RC1. If we had 4 units, well, 4 dwellings, 2 units, and 2 suites, I think that would be a reasonable doubling of, and there are opportunities to do that. Within our community, there are areas that were designated RC1. There were a lot of areas that were also designated RC2, and then we've got the Sarcee Meadows co-op housing that is in there. There's a lot of multiple housing in there. I think that we all can play more in it. I just think that the RCG went too far, and that finding a middle ground that provides that. So I love the idea that was mentioned regarding a secondary suite and then a a backyard suite on top of a garage or something like that. I think those are reasonable steps and I think we do all have to play in this. And so I'm not opposed to the growth, but I think it needs to be better planned.
No, I appreciate that, and sorry to hear about your school. Like, mine was almost closed. It turned into a storage facility, half of it into a storage facility. So I know what that can do to a community when you lose your neighborhood school. My second question I was going to ask you related there, I think you were touching on it there a little bit already, was just because you're the local expert, you know your neighborhood better than anyone else does. Any ideas in terms of if we wanted to add another 25% of people back to the neighborhood to get it back to where the population was before? Where would you think that could fit into Rutland?
I may be an outlier in that I think that a lot of the community would rather that what was there before RCG would remain there. And so I'm more on the progressive side to say that I would like to see a little bit more. And we were kids in the community. We were the kids in the community when we moved in 1996. And we're seeing a lot of turnover at this point. I think given a blended approach, I think that it needs to be done. And I would support something like that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that reasoned approach. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Question from Mr. Belzil, if you don't mind. You had said in your presentation there that you had told City Council once, I assume you mean the previous public hearing, and you had told us a second time that this wasn't what we want. I assume that you're talking about the election. Is that correct?
Correct.
I'm just wondering if you can maybe speak a little bit towards what advice you might have for us for council members who didn't run on repealing blanket rezoning, but still managed to win our elections.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm going to relitigate the election again. Look, it is a difficult job that you have to do. It was such a shocking flying in the face of the public that happened 2 years ago. I never lost my revulsion at what was done there. So what I'm urging is that whatever your deliberations end up being, you will hear from the public in these sessions, and they expect you to listen. And what was done then was really shocking, and it can never happen again. That is the end of a democracy when that kind of thing happens.
So you'd recommend that sort of majority, right? Whatever we hear from the majority is where you'd suggest that we place our vote as a whole, as a body.
I would suggest to you that you never had the legitimacy to put that bylaw in place. It was never a legitimate action, and the only action you can have is to take it back out and come forward again. And incidentally, Councillor, there was only one option put on the table. There were many others that could have been considered, and I've heard many, many good suggestions here this evening. People who are quite knowledgeable who can give you some ideas about how to come forward again. But there's no legitimacy in what's been done up to this point.
Similar to my comment to the previous speaker, I appreciate that reasoned approach that what we have right now is not working, but it sounds like you're open to a conversation about what we can do in our established communities.
Well, I think that's quite true. I'm not suggesting we freeze everything, only that we cannot proceed in that fashion.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Belzo. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Chabot, please.
Let's start with Mr. Goosen. First of all, Ken, great to see you.
Andre.
So you didn't get a chance to finish your presentation, and it looked like you're a little frustrated about not being able to do that. Do you have it still before you? Do you still have it?
It's in here.
Okay.
It's in here. And I tried very hard to stay on my notes, and I tend to go off script a lot, and this one I tried to stay on script. And so my concern and my sadness is the fact that, and I'm doing this for future homes and communities that have not gone through what we've gone through. The decision about the property in front of mine is done, although there is a court case that is happening on the RCG, on the restrictive covenant side, which is an expensive legal part. But my yard, my future, my community in front of me has changed inalterably, and irrespective of what happens here, it's a done deal. So we will see this massive complex in front of our house, and it will change the nature of our living space forever. And this has become our forever home, and likely probably the forever home for one of our kids. And it saddens me that we did everything we could, and it didn't happen. But that still doesn't stop me from coming here to say that I'm just going to roll up. And I think we still have a lot of work to do, and that it can be done in a better way.
You had, not that I want to rehash old stories or old discussions, but you had indicated a specific rationale as to why you thought that RCG wasn't suitable everywhere, especially in those areas where people had bought into a certain community for a very specific type of lifestyles. Do you mind repeating what you had said previously on that subject and how you felt it would have impacted you had this not have gone through?
Let's see if I've got you right here, Andre.
You're talking about quality of life and...
Oh, absolutely. When we bought into the community, with the restrictive covenant that was there, the fact that it was RC1, was a single dwelling with a garage, and there was a lot of property. There's green space, there are trees. I mean, our community is tree-lined and is open space. And our kids grew up in a community that was almost a park, with parks that were there, and we've lost a lot of those that have happened as far as Richmond Green and things like that are moving on the periphery of the community. But what we bought into a community with a sense of community. And I agree, our community has changed. It's aging out, and I've been to many funerals now of neighbors. But, I think we can move forward in a measured, reasoned way and be still respectful of the community that we are in. That what is being built is respectful to the development that is there, that it fits in, that it's complementary. And we're not seeing that, especially in this particular situation. And truly, as I mentioned, sadly, the owners there have really shown such disrespect to just even the city laws.
Yeah, that's all the question I had for you today, but thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
Voicing your concern. Mr. Collins, do you mind? So, Mr. Collins, first and foremost, I want to be clear about something. What I committed to was to bring forward a motion for council to consider repealing. Never said that I would repeal.
Understood.
You mentioned something about the Chinook LAP in that process. So you think that if council were to move forward with the repeal, that is one of the things that should be revisited, is the Chinook LAP?
Yes. The blanket upzoning became effective pretty early on in our LAP process. And so the granularity of the neighborhoods where you might say we could have singles here, semi-detached here, row homes here, all of that got wiped off the table because the only point of real discussion was, is it going to be RCG or even more dense? Is it going to be, HGO along the main streets and RCG everywhere else? It completely ignored the local context. And that's why I say, although we went through the LAP process, and you know my view of what a useless process that was at the time, it was predicated on RCG as the base zoning. If you repeal, then we need to go back and revisit the LAP so that we can address the prior land use classifications.
Yeah, there was another presenter here, I think it was Ms. Melcher, that spoke specifically about about that LAP, but she cited other reasons as well, other things that she felt were influenced by the blanket zoning. You talked about the RC1. Do you feel that there's other areas that also were impacted by the blanket zoning?
By the blanket zoning, it affected some of the planning around traffic. It affected the designation of neighborhood streets, neighborhood connectors versus main streets. So again, I think if we're going back to the prior land uses, then we just need to go and re-examine the granularity of the LAP, because it really didn't get down to that level. It didn't have to. Everything was RCG or more.
Well, you're typically pretty involved in these kind of things from my review from the past. I'm just curious if you had a chance to look at the other textual amendments that are being proposed or some of the other motions as a result of the motion arising.
I did look at the proposed amendments to the RCG that brings it down from 4+4 to a 3+3 and some lower requirements. I'm in favor of all of that because I think it is a little more, it's getting back to being complementary and incremental to the existing neighborhood as opposed to plonking in, as the other gentleman said, 11 units where there was a house before. So on that basis, if council does repeal the RCG, the companion amendment to reduce the scope of RCG is something I'd be in favor of.
Yeah, I know we've heard a lot of folks saying just straight repeal, don't do any of the amendments.
Well, I appreciate that there may be some confusion with the public out there that they're thinking that it's repeal or this revised RCG.
Right.
That's not the case. If we go back to where we were before before the blanket up zoning came in, people are going to be coming back before council seeking RCG land use amendments to existing R1 and R2 parcels. And that's what my comments were directed at this evening, which is be very careful that you're still complying with the municipal development plan about, stability of neighborhoods, preserving existing character, being complementary, being respectful, modest density.
Yeah, no, those are great answers. I kind of figured you'd have an answer. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you.
No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pantzopoulos, please.
Thank you so much. Mr. Collins, if you could stay up. Thank you. Thank you. Just picking up from Councillor Chabot about the LAP, you gave me a moment's pause thinking about the LAP being developed post blanket rezoning, and you said you would have been, maybe these are my words, but fundamentally different or materially changed. Maybe just speak, if blanket rezoning didn't exist, the Chinook LAP, what would it have looked like? How different?
It would have been different in the way it approached parks and schools. The plan still contemplates that public parks are going to be ringed with RCG. It didn't recognize, in a lot of cases, some of the traffic restrictions and the road restrictions. So streets were identified as neighborhood connectors, which vastly overstates the reality of what the road is used for and what its capacity is. And I'd say the most egregious examples were the ones that Ruth Melchior mentioned earlier in Park Hill. I mean, it's a dense little hillside community with a whole bunch of dead-end cul-de-sacs. And the planners said, this dead-end cul-de-sac is like a major neighborhood connector, and there are going to be 6-story apartment buildings in the cul-de-sac. It defies logic and common sense. So that's why I suggest that we need to reopen those LAPs and get back to looking at the detail on each street, given the prior zoning.
You mentioned parks and schools, neighborhood connectors, sixplex. That has nothing to do with blanket rezoning. So there's obviously something else with the LAP, like ultimately taking a R1, putting 4x4. You're talking about land use and things. I'm just trying to think about the blanket zone. When we revert it, we could still call it a neighborhood connector, and council in its wisdom could put a sixplex on that street. And the reason I ask, when I looked up the Chinook, the guiding principles of parks and open spaces and the industrials separate, main streets, obviously McLeod goes right down there, transit-orientated development. So again, to go back, is what would fundamentally, would those principles still, if you were to negotiate or discuss it today, would it have been the same? You still would have generally supported transit-orientated development?
Absolutely. I mean, there are good points in the planning, and they're the points that are consistent with the municipal development plan, which talks about transit-oriented development, talks about development of main streets. Mm-hmm. No problem with that. And there was a woman speaking earlier this evening, I think, who was upset about all the development around McLeod and Heritage. Mm-hmm. My personal opinion is I think that's appropriate development. It's on a major transit corridor. It's right beside an LRT station, redevelopment of the Y into higher density housing, the new apartment buildings. I think that is appropriate planning. What I think is inappropriate planning is when you're going into the heart of an established community that's R1, maybe R1 and R2, and you're plunking in these RCG developments which are vastly out of proportion and scale to anything that exists.
Clerks, do you mind just bringing up the Chinook Communities Local Area Plan? So we're just going to go to slide 30. So this is straight out of the plan. This is the urban form. So you know, the yellow and the darker yellow, for lack of a better term. So generally this, you'd be agnostic, like this sort of development, transit orientated, you know, along major routes. You mentioned Heritage, McLeod, that sort of area where density makes sense. You know, fundamentally, you're not so much against density per se, it's just where it makes sense, where there's the traffic can sustain it and so on. So
absolutely correct, I agree. My concern is going into the communities as opposed to the main corridors. I have no problem with the density that's proposed on the main corridors and connectors by transit. Again, that's consistent with the municipal development plan.
Consistent with the LAP as well. I mean,
yes, the LAP reflects the municipal.
It was just important because when you heard that, it gave me a moment's pause, because there's communities that they're in Ward 6 that have new LAPs. And oh goodness, what newish? You know, they have to completely redesign them, look back at them because of that. But I think what I'm hearing is generally it's there. Maybe it's more the dogma saying, okay, because you've got RCG, now you can go in and put a eightplex in the middle of nowhere in a cul-de-sac that maybe doesn't make any sense. You get rid of that if repeal occurs. Generally, it's not, okay, where it makes sense, you know, your community, if you could speak on behalf.
Yes, I take your point that, no, I'm not saying let's reinvent the wheel and say McLeod Trail is no longer a transit corridor. I'm not suggesting that. What I am suggesting is, using Park Hill as an example, that we go back and look at that community, which is RCG and more dense, and go back and realize it was R1 and R2. Let's see what of that should remain R1 and R2 and what other parts might be able to support increased density, and maybe none of it can. But that discussion needs to be held, and it never was held because RCG just made it moot.
I really appreciate that. I just want to clarify that you know, generally, again, all of us are sort of thinking about the same thing. If it makes sense, it's within our neighborhood. We want not control, but we have to know certainty. I think a lot of folks have mentioned that certainty, and an LAP like this gives you certainty. Let's make sure the form, make sure what you're getting. If it's a single, double, triple, whatever, you have those comforts. So thank you so much for presenting and walking me through your thoughts on your LAP. Thank you.
Happy to. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. That looks like it for questions for this panel. I'm eyeballing it. It looks like we have about 45 minutes left. I'm going to build a panel of 7 speakers, and I think that'll run us to about 9:30. So we'll try to get 7 folks in, and if I don't list you or your name, unfortunately we'll not be able to speak with you tonight. We will start tomorrow, first thing at 9:30 in the morning, though. All right, so I will list some names here. Maybe just give me a wave or speak up if I call your name, just to make sure that I know that you're here. So first up, do we have Frank Johnston with us? Frank, okay. Do we have Jane Ebern? Okay. I see you, Willem. Elizabeth Morden? Nope, no Elizabeth. Do we have Michael Jones with us?
I'm on the line.
Great, please stand by, Michael. Do we have Paul Bergman? Sean Heffel? Gian Kimber? Hasina Sadat? Barry Bortnick? Okay, come on down, Barry. Laureen Dar? Okay, come on down, Laureen. And Joy Lusk? Or Tom Kent? How about Christine Brodsky Ingham? Great, come down, Christy. so those 7 names that I just listed off, you'll be our final speakers for this evening. So if I did not list your name, unfortunately, we'll not have the ability to speak with you tonight, as we'll stop at 9:30 p.m. tonight. All right, let's start first with Frank Johnson, please.
Evening, Council. My name is Frank Johnston, and I'm opposed to the proposed motion. I want to give the long view of redevelopment. When I arrived as a student in the mid-1970s, housing was laughably cheap. Calgary was a place of opportunity. A colleague once reminded me that we had won the lottery by moving here, and homelessness didn't exist, at least not as a citywide issue. When my wife and I bought our bungalow in 1989, when it was the dominant housing type in our corner of West Hillhurst, Ward 7, it was affordable on our average income. Since then, new single families and duplexes have transformed our community. Their arrival brought an influx of young families that gave our area fresh vitality and stimulated local business. But we did have concerns with redevelopment. Concerns that are very similar to what people say about blanket rezoning now. They were about shadowing and loss of views, loss of trees, street parking, and changes to the community's character. We and our neighbors complained, but now we understand the new housing has made our neighborhood different, not worse. The problem of exclusivity. We did lose the diversity our community once enjoyed. Our neighbors are now surgeons, project managers, professors, and well-to-do empty nesters. We miss the laundry workers, the maintenance men, the students, and the single-parent moms who live near us. Our community no longer benefits from the balance that comes from living next to people from different walks of life. Recently, 16 row house units were added to our immediate area, breaking the rising trend of exclusivity. Without these units and the promise of more, we risk becoming a gated community behind an invisible but highly effective fence. Exclusivity contributes to the bitterness and cynicism all too present among young adults, shut out from economic opportunities my generation enjoyed. And exclusivity distorts housing market and forces households with lesser income into making difficult choices. Do they take on the burden of crushing costs, locate on the edge of the city, far from their place of work, or settle for unsafe accommodation? Or like the woman we found sleeping between our garage and the neighbors, no choice but to live on the street. Look to the future. Calgary through the 70s and 80s was known as the pretty little city by the bow, the time when most inner city housing was already in place. Its affordable housing meant that we faced one less barrier to winning our own economic lottery. We now live in a city of national and international importance. Its growth in size and complexity has pushed along the changes my wife and I have witnessed in West Hillhurst, and it will drive further changes through the inner city. Yet opponents of blanket rezoning would insist their neighborhoods, the ones built when Calgary was pretty and little, can be exempted from this reality, that their communities can take a pass on being redeveloped, that the issues of affordability and homelessness can be met by stitching another subdivision onto the edge of the city and building apartments somewhere else. Calgarians can't have it both ways. We can't expect to stay a pretty little city and harvest the benefits of a dynamic and growing Calgary, make it more difficult for the market to fill in the missing middle, and it becomes harder for young people, the entrepreneurs and the city builders of our future to be successful. Improve the zoning we have. The past 2 years gave us real-time demonstration of the gains that flow from blanket rezoning. To repeal this bylaw is unnecessary because it can't be improved by appropriate fine-tuning. However, after reading the Appendix 4 of the agenda over the weekend, I must disagree with the council-directed amendments. As proposed, they would substantially weaken the effectiveness of the current RCG provisions and eliminate developments that would be entirely appropriate. I suggest instead that council increase planners' discretion to determine the fit of the new project into likely redevelopment of the affected block. Leadership on change is essential. The more important task before council is to articulate and guide the city guide the changes our city must embrace if it is to remain on a positive trajectory. Encourage Calgarians to look beyond their property line and past the end of their block so they too can see the benefits that flow from blanket rezoning to the whole of the city. City leadership is essential if Calgary is to continue to be a welcoming place where all residents can find safe and find success and live safe and decent lives. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. We'll go now to Jane, please.
Good evening. My name is Jane Ebern, and I have lived in Ward 7 since 1995, and I'm a member of the Calgary Alliance for the Common Good. I believe we need all parts of the city to do their fair share of densification if we are to reduce Calgary's incredibly expensive and unsustainable sprawl. We need to build denser in all existing areas. Ward 7 and 8 cannot do the densification for the city. In Ward 7, I am horrified to see that a 38-story apartment building is proposed for an area with a 26-story limit. That's the old Grace Hospital site. At the same time that the city is considering this 38-story building there, council here is considering allowing 2/3 of Calgary to revert to only single-family homes? Like, let us be reasonable and please require at least some densification in all parts of Calgary. But having said that, I believe we do need to amend the current blanket rezoning. When I spoke to council in favor of blanket rezoning almost 2 years ago, I stated that I thought that 12 plexes were too dense to be included in blanket rezoning. In hindsight, I would say now that both 8 plexes and 12 plexes should require much more community input and should not be part of blanket rezoning. So let us amend, but not end blanket rezoning. To repeal it entirely would be a huge backward step for the city. Let's instead find a reasonable compromise. So number one, keep blanket rezoning throughout the city for duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. And by fourplex, I mean any configuration of a maximum of 4 units on a site. Could be a single-family home with a backyard suite and a basement suite. Could be 4 row houses in a row without any basement or backyard suites. It could be a side-by-side duplex, each with a basement suite. And number two, amend the blanket rezoning to demand much more community input and planning on those 8 plexes and 12 plexes, and indeed, I guess, on anything larger than 4 units on a site. Let's get more community input, though, on how many and where these larger 8 and 12 plexes go on the street. What is the effect on parking, the green canopy? How do we manage the bins? These types of buildings can still be considered, but they won't benefit from the fast approval of blanket rezoning. They should require more planning time, even if that adds to the costs. These 8 and 12 plexes are the buildings that are causing so much concern for my friends in the suburbs and the central established neighborhoods. The duplexes and fourplexes are not an issue for them because duplexes and fourplexes aren't going to radically change a street. There is a huge need for more of these duplexes and fourplexes in Calgary, I believe, particularly in the established, older, centrally located neighborhoods where the land cost is so much higher. You know, for example, I watched friends, a mid-30s, 2-income professional couple, make 23 offers in Calgary over 18 months, all offers over asking price, as they looked for their first home. They were finally able to buy a duplex in Tuxedo Park last summer, after 18 months of looking. There were very few duplexes, and centrally located single-family homes in good condition were too expensive due to the land cost. What they needed was more supply of duplexes in this missing middle price range, sort of $600,000 to $800,000 in established, centrally located neighborhoods. They didn't want to be way out in a suburb. These smaller duplex, fourplex units feel a real need in providing the missing middle in Calgary housing. And as people move into this mid-market housing, they free up rental units. This is not low-income housing, but it is more affordable than single-family homes in the same area. And affordability, of course, is a relative term. The term affordable housing does not necessarily mean low-income housing at all, and we need to get these terms straight. We also have a great need in Calgary for low-income or rent-to-income housing where rents are limited to 30% of income. This will require government land to make it viable. It will not happen only with the private sector. It needs to be a coordinated effort by governments and nonprofit housing organizations. And by retaining at least the duplex, triplex, fourplex blanket rezoning, Calgary should still be eligible for those desperately needed federal funds for low-income housing. By allowing blanket rezoning of only duplex, triplex, fourplex everywhere, we will get slightly denser communities that don't destroy neighborhoods while we properly plan those developments larger than 4 units. So please amend, not end, blanket rezoning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll call on Willem to come next, please.
Hello, I sent in a few slides this morning. Did you get them? The giant panel 11 in the subject line? Potentially?
We'll take a look right now.
Okay. If you want, we can let someone else go while we sort it out. But
Yeah, why don't we do that? Michael, are you with us?
I am. I can go.
All right, we're swapping you in, buddy.
All right. Good evening, Council. My name is Michael Jones, and I'm speaking to you today as someone who wears two distinctly different hats. One is my hat of being a CA president and the head of our development committee. The other is being a Calgarian. As I've been working through the various development permits that have arrived this month in my community, I've been asking myself how to give the best feedback and advocacy to ensure that these demolitions are going to count. Because these homes have already been chosen to be demolished by their owner. There's no way for us to bring them back. I've been reminded quite acutely that the land use that we have in our neighborhood does not dictate the design, but it definitely influences, whether it's something fantastic for the community or if the owner has a desire for a McMansion or even something like the hub near 16th and Crowchild. I cannot endorse what is before us today, even if it's presented exactly what this council asked administration for. Not because Sonalta has any RCG lots, we don't, but because it's a key component to make the other 97 actions in the housing strategy significantly more viable. I enjoyed reading the quarterly briefing that came to council on March 11th. It reiterated that rezoning is no silver bullet, but it is successful in removing red tape and removing the hurdle of needing to go to council on items that were already being approved more than 97% of the time. That same briefing also had a lovely infographic reminding folks it takes roughly 18 months from submission to occupancy. 18 months from when rezoning took place was this February 6, 2026. That was 45 days ago. Like others who can more eloquently explain, it has been already voiced by you folks in your questions, RCG is most decidedly not perfect. But letting perfect be the destroyer of good is not a way to keep the city attractive. It's imperative that a repeal doesn't go forward without a replacement that empowers the housing strategy and prevents us from becoming the bureaucratic morass of Toronto. Much more important for today is my other hat. I'm on the phone tonight wearing my hat as a Calgarian, an Albertan, a Canadian, a Calgarian who loves their city and how much potential we have, an Albertan who is tax-averse like a toddler to vegetables, and a Canadian who sees our city as welcoming to all and grew up in suburban Ward 4 with folks originally from all over Canada and the world. Whether we bring back restrictive zoning or not, our city will continue on, but we're placing a major thumb on the scale on who can and who is involved in our established communities. So as a Calgarian, I ask council to not just act reactively, but to think about how we're actually going to empower our city to evolve, since our plan to have growth pay for infrastructure replacement only works if there can be growth. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Michael. I think we have your slides now, Willem. You can come back up.
promise is worth it. There's charts, but not too many charts. Hello, Mayor and Council. My name is Willem Klumpenhauer. I'm a transportation planner and researcher, and I run a consulting practice here in Calgary. I live in Ward 11. I'm going to talk about why I opposed the motion before you through the lens of transit specifically, because I think that this council generally understands transit is important and you want to support it. I hope I'm right in that assumption. And so I want to make sure that you understand what you're voting on today, or weeks from now, but depending on when it happens, in those terms. There was a lot of talk after the election about this council welcoming its 2 millionth Calgarian. Even if it takes a few more years, it really begs the question, where the heck are the next 500,000 Calgarians going to live? How is that going to affect how we get around? Next slide, please. I see 3 basic options on the table. Build on the edge of the city and sprawl out, concentrate everyone near transit that exists now, or spread that density throughout the existing developed area. When it comes to transit, sprawl is an absolutely terrible idea. Running buses through dendritic suburbs in the far outskirts of the city is really not conducive to a useful transit system. And so that leaves us with two options, gentle density citywide and transit-focused density. Passing the motion before you today would suggest that you may only be interested in concentrating density near transit. So let's take a minute and talk about what actually makes transit tick, because I think this is what you care about, and I want to make sure we're speaking the same language. Next slide, please. Transit consultant Jarrett Walker nicely describes what people really want from transit with 7 basic desires. Go where they want, when they want, quickly, reliably, comfortably, affordably, and with dignity. You don't have to memorize that list, don't worry, but what you need to know is that of all those desires, frequency, how often you run buses, is the one that really impacts behavior the most. Frequency is what makes it easy to leave your car at home without checking an app first, and with frequency, they say you have freedom. Next slide, please. Frequency is not really a political decision, it's an economic one. You can make a route more attractive by running more buses, but people need to live near those buses to use it. They need to be able to be within walking distance. With people nearby, a transit route cannot thrive. And as you can see from this fairly simple diagram, more people near transit, more people to walk to transit. Next slide, please. As a sort of rule of thumb, not set in stone, transit can really support good frequency at around a sort of neighborhood density of 30 units per hectare. That's kind of the minimum at which frequent transit service is justifiable. Duplexes with a suite on a standard Calgary lot could clear that number if it's ubiquitous because you've made it easy and fast to build, but that's just barely. Having that kind of gentle density citywide, or a little bit more, could really push our whole transit network towards a positive ridership cycle, and, for all you fiscal hawks out there, a much lower operating subsidy. Next slide, please. So what about concentrating transit nodes and corridors? For that, as one does on a Saturday night, I did a bit of quick geospatial analysis, and I found that the amount of existing residential zoned area around the LRT and max stations at various distances computed the theoretical number of people that would live there at various land use densities and took off however many people are living there right now to see, in theory, how many additional people you could put if you concentrated on these nodes and corridors. So what you see is a chart of a bunch of different scenarios. On the y-axis, number of people you might be able to accommodate theoretically if you did a full build-out, and on the x, the target density that would get you there. The dashed lines are as if you count the LRT and the max lines, or the sort of the whole primary transit network, whereas the solid lines are just LRT. And the different colors represent different catchment areas from 400 to 800 meters. The lesson from this chart is this: if you are going to only focus on transit-oriented density, as repealing might suggest, you're going to have to really go for it. Higher density near LRT and max stations, like much higher density near LRT and max stations within an 800-meter radius. That's the only way you even get close to 500,000 people on this chart. And I'm not sure you as council, maybe I would ask you, are willing to commit to that kind of alternative. I'm not naive about where this is going, so let me tell you what I'm really asking for. Don't throw this all out and start over. Find a solution that combines gentle density with good transit-oriented communities. You need both, so commit to it. Next slide, please. Whatever you decide today, remember this Venn diagram. It's a mathematical certainty of cities. You cannot add more low density without either cutting services or raising taxes. The math really doesn't care about your politics. So come up with a realistic plan first, and then take action. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will ask Barry to come on up next, please.
I did have a presentation, an update of which I submitted earlier this evening.
Yeah, so next up we have Barry Bortnick. I believe you're on panel 12.
Yep. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Farkas, Council, and a shout out to my councillor, Mike Atkinson. I appreciate the time I've been given to speak regarding the motion to repeal blanket rezoning. My name is Barry Bortnick, and I live in Ward 7, or East Crescent Heights, as it's known where I live. An area that was already zoned as medium density and subject to the problems that increased density brings, including garbage, parking, and noise-related issues. I spoke before this council almost 2 years ago and gave conditional support for blanket rezoning at that time. My support was dependent on improvements to bylaw enforcement. Unfortunately, there have been no noticeable changes. Following the existing process can be very frustrating, taking several weeks, many interactions, and just try to address a single issue. And so it becomes disheartening to report new problems. I believe bylaw staff do the best they can with their existing tools and processes, but these tools and processes need some work. I do have concrete ideas on how to improve them, though. As a homeowner, and as a sympathetic ear for everyone impacted by the lack of affordable housing, I believe I understand both sides of the issue. However, I'd like to focus on one issue that has not really hit the radar here yet, and that is bylaw enforcement and motor vehicle noise. I think we can all agree that density increases the number of bylaw infractions, at least as it pertains to garbage, parking, and noise. After the blanket repeal in September, in September 2024, the much heralded new motor vehicle noise bylaw also came into effect, along with a dedicated traffic enforcement team. This should have been able to address some of my motor vehicle noise concerns, but the bylaw was inadequate and the new traffic team was overwhelmed with addressing safety issues first. I can probably count on one or fewer hands the number of motor vehicle noise violation tickets that were actually issued this past year. It's unsurprising that a $270 fine with a near zero likelihood of getting caught would do nothing to stop the noise. And so it continues to get worse. It's a fact that urban noise is a serious health issue, and it boggles my mind that we continue to put up with this bullying as a society. Next slide, it's a video. If you can turn the volume up on it, please. Next slide. This is a car, one of several intentionally noisy cars in my neighborhood. This one has had its muffler removed. I've left several messages for the owner. I've called 311 and my local community police officer. I've contacted past and present Ward 7 city councilors, all to no avail. They continue to disturb and wake us up at all hours, and there appears to be nothing I can do about it. Density continues to increase in my neighborhood as single-family homes are replaced with multiplexes and larger developments. Yards disappear, parking becomes more difficult, garbage is a never-ending call to 311, and noisy vehicles multiply. Some of the new development was out of scale in their neighborhoods, and a more nuanced and balanced approach must be developed, as many speakers have said today. This is fixable, but it requires creativity, imagination, education, and a coordinated effort to overhaul bylaws and their enforcement. To conclude, I would support blanket rezoning as it is at a more sensitive density level, and if bylaw and motor vehicle noise enforcement were to become more effective. I'm even willing to volunteer my time in this pursuit. I'd like to be part of the solution. Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Thank you so much. We'll call on Laureen next, please.
Thank you. Good evening. Many Calgarians participated in the 2024 process in good faith, and a significant number expressed clear opposition to the blanket upzoning. Despite that, the bylaw was passed. That has left many residents questioning whether their input was meaningfully considered. Again, this morning, the report from the manager of city planning had the ring of a biased process and foregone conclusion. Today is not just about zoning. It's about trust and an opportunity to demonstrate that public input does matter. I support a return to pre-2024 zoning protections, not as a rejection of growth, but as a restoration of balance. Zoning is not just about buildings, it shapes how people live. Many families choose their neighborhoods for safety, predictability, and a sense of community. Places where neighbors can know one another, children can play safely, and seniors can move about comfortably. These outcomes are not accidental. They're the result of intentional planning over time. Of course, some residents prefer higher density living, and that choice will remain available and should be expanded where it's logical. But a diverse and well-functioning city provides options. It does not impose uniformity. There were two main arguments in favor of blanket upzoning. First, that development approvals were too slow to meet the demands of a growing population. But the solution to inefficiency is not to remove structure. It's to improve processes while maintaining thoughtful planning. Speed should not replace responsibility. The second and most common argument was affordability. But much of the development enabled under these changes does not result in housing that's affordable, and in fact removes existing affordable options from the market. Instead, it often increases rental density without improving long-term affordability or access to ownership. And importantly, infrastructure concerns cannot be overlooked. Water systems, waste management, parking availability, road capacity, and public safety services are already under pressure. Increasing density without requiring proportional infrastructure support places additional strain on existing communities. Developers of new complexes, as I understand it, are not required to provide adequate parking for every unit. That factor alone means they are only adding stressors to the neighborhood without any obligation to mitigate those stressors. And that brings me to a key concern. To what extent was this upzoning decision influenced by external funding agreements or policy incentives tied to densification? Programs such as the Federal Housing Accelerator Fund, along with CMHC initiatives tied to housing supply targets, provide funding to municipalities in exchange for commitments to increase density and accelerate approvals. These programs are publicly known, but it's not clear how those agreements intersect with local decision-making. Commitments were made in advance of public consultation and without transparency to constituents. Residents were not informed that such agreements could shape planning decisions at the neighborhood level. This is not about opposing funding. It's about ensuring that funding does not quietly shape decisions without transparency or public informed awareness. Before moving forward, Calgarians deserve clear, transparent answers to these questions. Calgary is historically a city built on trust. Trust that the decisions of this scale will be made openly, responsibly, and with meaningful public input. That trust has been significantly strained. Rebuilding it requires transparency, accountability, and a willingness to reverse decisions when legitimate concerns are clearly and widely raised. So today I'm asking Council to take 3 clear actions. 1, direct administration to provide a clear and concise summary of all financial or legal obligations the city faces with the repeal of the blanket upzoning bylaw, along with any limitations that funding agreements may have on Council's ability to make independent planning decisions going forward. 2, pause any further implementation or expansion of the blanket upzoning until that information has been provided to Calgarians with time for review and response. 3, take decisive steps to repeal the blanket upzoning bylaw and restore zoning protections in a way that reflects community input and local priorities. Calgarians are not asking to stop growth. They're asking for transparency, accountability, and a real voice in decisions that shape their communities. This is your opportunity to restore trust and to show Calgarians that their voices still matter in this city. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll ask Christine to come up next, please.
Good evening, Your Worship and councillors, city councillors. My name is Christine Brodsky-Ingham. I live in Ward 13 in Canyon Meadows and have lived there for the last 28 years, previously living in Linwood. I'd like to point out that, first of all, this is about land use. And land use is something that council decides on what can be built where, whether it's a Foothills Industrial Park or an airport or a housing development. Section 642 of the Municipal Government Act states, when a person applies for a development permit in respect of a development provided for by land use bylaw pursuant to 640 sub 2 sub B sub I, the development authority must, if the application otherwise conforms to the land use bylaw and is complete in accordance with section 683.1, issue a development permit with or without conditions as provided for in the land use bylaw. By having this land use bylaw, which provides for RCG, RGO, and I've forgotten the other name. I live in an RCG district. That means that there is no discretion available to the people, to the person making the decision. One development authority decides for almost 8,000 people in our neighborhood, and there's no discretion. What the community thinks is irrelevant. The only thing that is considered is, does this projected project fit into the size that the city allows? Is it less than 11 meters tall, less than 50% of the land of the lot? If it's fourplex plus 4 basement units, 60%. If it's sixplex and 6 basement units, and so on. The community has no say whatsoever. In the development that just occurred in our area, 147 letters from residents was ignored. The city councilor's letter, the statement at the SDAB was, we will ignore the city councilor's letter, even though the city councilor represents our neighborhood. This is about money. The reason to build these kinds of buildings is that the developer and investor gets to decide where to build them, anywhere in the RCG, regardless of whether it fits in the community, prevents other people from having sunlight or anything else. They do not care. If you look at the one of the design sites, it says we are here to come to. I won't name the particularly design company, that may not be fair. We are here to maximize return on development. Another company which builds, which has been in business for more than 20 years, says developers are interested in the maximum return, put the maximum number of units that will be allowed by the city onto their property. And they claim that if you build a fourplex with 4 basement units, when you sell it to an investor, you can make 25 to 30% of profit. This is not the way we want to build our city. We don't want it decided by developers and investors as to who lives where, what kind of conditions they live in. In our community, more than 50% of households, that means everybody who earns money in that household, parents, grandparents who are on pensions, children working part-time because they're students, more than 50% of the people living, households in our neighborhood, cannot afford to live in the fourplex that is planned with 4 basement suites a block and a half from where I live. That is not affordable housing. You are destroying the neighborhoods that have affordable housing, like Canyon Meadows and many other neighborhoods, so that the people who live there can't afford to live there, and people like them. We have slightly less than the median income in Calgary. Median means the person in the middle, 50% above, 50% below, not an average, and they can't afford to live there. There are other methods of doing this. As for very quickly, I'll just go through the environmental problems. They tear down trees, have 50% log coverage, have concrete walkways. We live near Fish Creek Park. If any birds want to visit, any butterflies, any bees, there is no place for them to live, nothing for them to eat. It's right almost to the sidewalk with a little bit of green space. No consideration for the environment. They're going to put in air conditioning, more greenhouse gases, because they're not building anything that's livable. I think that we should definitely, immediately, return to the original zoning. That way it gives people the choice, and the city the choice of possibly making relaxations to where appropriate. And I believe in multifamily, I believe in densification. I'm fine with that, but not where the developer decides how it works.
Thank you, Christine. Unfortunately, you're at time.
Pardon me?
Unfortunately, you're at time.
I was just going to say, in these areas, we have to look at all these considerations, and people who live there should have a say.
Thank you very much. This concludes the panel. We have some questions, though. Councillor Panizopoulos, please.
Oh, there we go. Mr. Klupenhauer, thank you so much for that presentation. Clerks, could you bring up his slide deck, particularly page 6? I was really fascinated by your Saturday night adventure and running that regression on population, and maybe just, unfortunately, given your 5 minutes, you have to run through it. Do you mind just talking through a little bit? Slide 6. Yeah, perfect. I've got it sitting here. So maybe just, this on a standalone basis, and then I'd love to understand, development in an existing area where there is existing transit going through. So I'm thinking, for example, in my neck of the woods in Ward 6, you've got an existing C train, Just maybe walk through, start with this, and then we can just kind of go there, because I've never seen this, and it's extremely fascinating for me.
Yeah, so actually it might be most useful to go to the very end of this, the slide after where I ended. There'll be a map on it, I believe. Yeah, there we go. So the way I did this was pretty simple. I took all the LRT stations, or all the LRT plus the MAX stations, and I drew a circle around it, 400, 600, 800 meters. And then I took the zoning data that we have that's on the open data website, and I took just the residential part of it, and I intersected the two to figure out how much residential area sits, whatever the zone may be, sits within, let's say, 800 meters of a transit stop. And then, so I got hectares, got an area. Then I did some assumptions about how many people could be on that. That's what you see on the x-axis of that chart. I used 2 people per unit. That's actually generous for a denser kind of apartment style thing. That's fine. And then I created these charts for all the different scenarios. So you can go back to the other chart on 6, I think it is, or 5. And that's the result of that, is changing what the density would be on that specific area and changing how big those circles are.
How should we think of this in the context of our existing transit system? We had a record usage, almost 100 million in 2024. I think 2025 or somewhere similar. So if we look at this, the density of Calgary would probably be less than 30 units per ha, give or take, because all the single family, if you took the square footage, if you will, of Calgary density. So under that logic, our transit system fails, yet it still thrives, maybe not in a financial sense, but it works. Generally, financial is one question. We'll address that. So I'm just, again, trying to reconcile this. This implies that the only functional way you can have make sense is row house, stacked, low rise. I would suggest low rise, actually. Really to make it sustainable, you need Toronto. Big stories just along every C train. Just how can I reconcile that, given the observation of 100 million Calgarians using transit today with a density that's closer to the target density of probably 25 to 30?
Well, we could definitely, it's probably for another meeting, but spend time talking about what a successful transit system is versus not. I think it's great that ridership is returning and we're breaking records. We're adding more people to the city. It kind of makes sense. We have a very, very good core LRT system that attracts a lot of riders. So certainly, the densification around that helps. I'm not sure. And I guess the point of what I'm saying with this chart is that if you are going to focus on densifying around transit and continuing to densify around transit, it's going to take a lot more than I think is comfortable for this council, potentially. So it's going to take a lot if you just want to do that. There's one other thing to consider is we spend a lot of time talking about the LRT, talking about the rapid transit. One of the things that's great about this blanket style density, this gentle uplift, is that it really helps what is really the workhorse of the whole system, which is these bus routes running through neighborhoods, right? Like I live near the 10, and the 10 doesn't run very often, half an hour usually, 20 minutes, half an hour at best. If there were more people living within walking distance of that 10, it would justify running it more often. You'd see a better operating ratio, because those are the routes that are expensive to run, that are sort of, we need them because we want people to be nearby them. And by lifting up the whole city, all of those routes become much more efficient, much more effective, and those routes feed into our frankly fantastic LRT system that kind of breaks ridership records all the time.
You mentioned gets you where? What would that get you to? You need a density around transit to get to.
Yeah, so there's a bit of a sweet spot. So maybe you've heard about the transit death spiral. It's the way that people call it. It's a spiral that happens where ridership is low, so costs are high, so you increase the fares. That drives down, but you don't change the service. That drives down ridership, so on and so forth. But it turns out it actually happens in the other way. If you get more riders and you're able to bring more riders to your system, it makes it more efficient. You don't have to raise fares and you can run more service. That's more attractive. As long as the people are there, they will come to the bus route, they will ride it more, and it works its way up. And that, when I talk about that 30 units per hectare as sort of a rule of thumb, that's kind of the inflection point at which higher than that, transit could start to do an upward spiral. Below that, it starts to become very difficult without really strong policies to stop it from going downward.
Is there a break-even point, if you will, 8 plexes in every street corner versus good density along transit? Like is there some, should you match it 1 for 1? And can you combine it with things like park and rides? Can you combine it? Think of those shuttle buses. So ultimately, you're right. I'm not walking to my train anymore. I'm just driving. As I do to 69th, I drive to 69. So there's a sweet spot. It sounds like it's one or the other. If you had, again, focusing on transit, but this is sort of implying you need all of the above. And if you were just to focus on generally along transit and make it dense and add more park and rides and add more shuttle buses bringing people to and from, I'm just assuming the C train is the key. Can you get to where is a good spot for Calgary, absent putting an 8-plex on every street corner?
Well, I don't even think you need an 8-plex on every street corner to have that gentle uplift. What you can have is single-family homes. And in my remarks, I mentioned like the duplex. If the duplex was everywhere, that's kind of where you hit that 30 units per hectare if you had a duplex plus a suite or two on each of those. But that would have to be like most lots, right? Like to get to that.
So you don't think even if you kept R1, we go back, we end blanket rezoning, repeal, and then we focus on nodes and corridors, and we build up density there, you think we would, go from 100 million riders to 100 plus, it would still be a failure? You think you cannot have a successful city build?
I think from a purely numbers perspective, if you were to try and do that, you would have to build very, very high density, probably 800 meters or more, probably from max and LRT stops, and then maybe you could start to make the numbers work.
To get to what state? So maybe that's to get to a state of a profitable sea train? Is that what you're thinking?
No, I'm thinking in terms of accommodating the next 500,000 people that are supposed to move here in the next 4 to 5 years. That's what I'm thinking of. Obviously, more people near transit is going to be great for it. Park and rides also kind of controversial. It's probably the least efficient way to use land is to put a parking lot next to a train station. So park and rides, really good for starting out access, but you will see very quickly that as the transit gets better, that use of that land, probably not good for storing.
So back to sort of balance, if, one of my colleagues, Councillor Jameson, was talking about Seton, and I was just looking at a development in Ward 6 that has units per hectare of 45. That's the proposed. So if we have up a build around outside, if you will, on the edges, a density that is thoughtful city planning combined with nodes and corridors and transit, do you think that combination would be sufficient? Because now you've got your 30-40 target at the end of the line, if you will, so you can justify buses, and then they get up to a transit that isn't 800 meters, it's something narrow. I guess what I'm solving at is the solution, it can't be just density everywhere to justify the next 500,000. Is there hybrid models? Are we going down that path, or are we destined to fail?
Of course, and I think you need to run the numbers that you need. You need to do both. You'll hear yes and, right? Yes and is what people talk about. You can't, what I'm making the point is you can't just focus on densification around transit. You also, understandably, can't just focus on gentle density everywhere. You need to do both. And the sweet spot obviously becomes a political decision for you. What I'm suggesting is the better you do in terms of spreading out that density, the better you do for the transit network. That's what I'm suggesting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Over to Deputy Mayor Schmidt, and if we want to go for more than 4 minutes, we'll require a 2/3 vote of council to do so. Over to you.
I might be slightly longer than 4 minutes.
All right, we'll go to 9:30 and I'll bang the gavel unless somebody wants to make a motion and continue later in 9:30.
I'll just continue with Mr. Klumpenhauer. So I think getting at the heart of what your responses were there to Councillor Pantazopoulos is something that I refer to when it comes to density and building housing is that we need as many tools in the toolkit as we can to get a variety of the way that we build. What I hear you saying is that if you build one way around transit, you get one type of transit. So if you're only building around LRT and MAX stations, then you may not actually serve other folks who want to access transit. So by having a blend of development and different tools, we can actually support transit, not only at the primary network points, but also to get people to those primary network points. Is that fair to say that what you're getting at there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the formula is kind of straightforward. It is like running a lot of vehicles. The LRT works really well because we run a lot of trains. We have big trains. It goes fast. It doesn't get stuck in traffic, those kinds of things. But those people need to live nearby. So that's the sort of nodes and corridors thing. We see that in Toronto. There's beautiful aerial photographs you see of all of these densities. But you also need to serve other people with transit. We're not all of a sudden going to just get rid of all of the bus routes through all the communities and only put people on LRT. We need to have service everywhere in the city, and so that service can become more cost-effective, more successful, often safer when you have more people riding it, if you do that as well. So you get both kinds, depending on which way you go.
So a full repeal here, should we vote on that? What effect, with the data that you have here, what effect would that have on our ability to continue to fund transit in a way that actually gets people to ride transit?
Yeah, I think it's a little tricky to say that, in a year or a little over a year, it's already made a difference and increased. I'll try to talk fast, Mayor. It's increased the...
Unfortunately, I have to interject. If we go even a moment longer,
Oh, okay.
we will no longer be in compliance with the procedure bylaw. Councillor Chabot, do you want to test the will of council?
I'd like to make a motion to suspend the procedural bylaw to continue to the conclusion of this panel.
All right, that's been moved by Councillor Chabot, seconded by Councillor Yule. This motion will require a 2/3 majority of council. Madam Clerk, let's please engage the vote.
Just take us 1 minute to prepare it.
And just as an update on some of the numbers, we've heard from 46 presenters. We have a total of 397 speakers to hear from, which means we have 351 individuals remaining. We're approximately 10% through, so I'm guessing at this rate it's about 10 more days for proceedings. So the motion is up on the screen. Let's engage the e-vote, please. And this, please vote yes if you'd like to stay for the conclusion of questions for the panel. Otherwise, we will start at 9:30 in the morning tomorrow. Or we leave now.
Councillor Chabot, your vote, please. Thank you. Councillor McLean, your vote, please.
No.
Mayor Farkas, your vote, please. Thank you. All the votes are in.
Thank you. Please display the results. And that motion is carried 11-4 with counts. One sec. Oh my gosh. Councillors Ward, Jameson, McLean, and Johnston are opposed. All right, we will carry on as you were.
I think you're in the middle of a reply there.
I got distracted by exciting procedure policy. You want to just hit the very last part of your question?
It was, oh man. It was it just related to the overall effects.
Right. Okay. So I think it's been not enough time to see the benefit of rezone. I think that's been pretty clear in terms of the numbers of things that have been built with it. I think that by repealing it without thinking about the consequences and without having the willpower to come back and find something that works for transit, you're going to continue to have struggles at budget time with funding it the way that you want to fund it, with it operating at an operating ratio that council is comfortable with, all of those kinds of things. So I think going back to what we had, which was mostly exclusionary zoning throughout the city, that's going to make it continue to make it harder, especially as we add neighborhoods on the outskirts of the city and have to serve those with transit and pay for that transit, to not run into a downward spiral.
Great, thank you. I have a question for Mr. Johnston. So, Mr. Johnston, your submissions are interesting to me because you have lived in your neighborhood for a long time. You've gone, it sounds like, through an evolution of your perception of the changes to your neighborhood, that you've come to the point where you could see some things changing more to allow more diversity of people living in your neighborhood. As you mentioned, you'd like to see different neighbors from different walks of life living near you. So often what we've been hearing around that argument is, well, that I don't like the change because of things like parking, because of things like the amount of garbage cans in the back, those types of issues. So can you, as somebody who has lived in your neighborhood for a long time, how did you come to the point where your main focus wasn't on those issues? It was on seeing perhaps some upside to the change. What was your point of reaching that level of perception?
Well, it evolved, obviously. I think the point I would make is when we first moved there, the block I lived on was mostly the 1950s style bungalows. And the first few infills that came in seemed to be enormously large, and we had a negative reaction to that because it was, quote, changing the character of our neighborhood. We went to the DAB with several of those proposals. As it turned out, our neighborhood has changed tremendously. And it's still a beautiful neighborhood. And I think part of it is issues like garbage, parking, and that are perhaps not as bad as some areas of the city that have much higher density. The majority of the units in our community are single family or duplexes, with row housing only recently being reintroduced. So my view would be those issues, I think, can be better managed through appropriate policy. And I guess to give you one example, our street has a beautiful canopy of elms on it. During the development of single families, duplexes, some of those trees have been damaged. And most recently, a building on the end of our street, new construction in the street, is going to result in the loss of two significant mature elms. My understanding is the city's policy on protecting trees on public lands is way out of date and provides minimal enforcement tools to city staff. So to me, that's an obvious way in which action by the city could strengthen and get better compliance to preserving, protecting trees on public lands. I mean, that's one small example. And I think the other issues around parking, garbage disposal, I think can be managed equally through better policies.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Eber, similar, you brought a similar perspective, so I have the same question for you as well.
Well, you know, I live on a street, 13th Street, and I love the mixture. And I have a 12-unit apartment building, 2.5 stories high, right across the street from me. I know there was just a gentleman here complaining about how an 11-unit was going to destroy his neighborhood across from him. But in that apartment building, we have the local cheesemonger, we have seniors, we have people on lower incomes. Right next to it is a 4-unit townhouse, and next to it is another 4-unit townhouse. But on my north side is a $2 million, 5,000 square foot single-family home. And, you know, and then there are 1912 bungalows. So the street has a wonderful mixture. You know, we still have some families. I'd love to see a few more families. But that, and parking is tight, but it's not impossible. And I don't own the piece of pavement in front of my house. My husband thinks he does. But, you know, so we have to, you know, drive 50 yards to park somewhere. It's still okay. And it's a wonderful community. And we talk to each other. And we're tight together. The yards are small, but we respect each other's privacy and noise, but we are a community. And I think that's wonderful, and I would hate for us to lose the diversity we have on the street. I think it's so important. Does that answer your, I mean, I've been an advocate of the area since I moved there in '95, but even more so as it has become denser over the last 10 years.
So it sounds to me like your focus is on the people.
Yeah, I mean, but there's a limit to the density. I am very concerned what we're doing with the Grace Hospital site as being too much, and I'm concerned about some of the high apartment buildings on the south side of Riley Park. You know, we built some good ones at sort of 8 stories, but now there's talk of 12 stories, and we're going to shade more of the park. I mean, reasonable density. And it should be dense because we are within easy reach of, you know, Sunnyside LRT, but let's not go overboard.
So again, I'll bring up the toolkit thing. If we have multiple tools, then we don't have to rely solely on super high and super dense.
Yep. And
Is that the
and we
point that
don't
you're raising?
exempt areas entirely to remain single family, so we can jam even more density in wards 7 and 8. We all have to do our share. And a duplex or a triplex, God forbid, even in Lake Bonavista, isn't going to ruin the neighborhood. But it will make housing that is less expensive than buying the whole lot and the land cost in the single family home in general. At least it certainly does in my area.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chabot, please.
Ms. Dern or Dar? Ms. Dar, sorry. First of all, Ms. Dar, I want to say I really liked your presentation. It was very thoughtful and
Thank you.
and very well put. Now, you're against blanket zoning, but you're not opposed to the idea of revisiting where higher density would be appropriate in a local area plan?
Absolutely. I think, you know, it was just really difficult that the citizens' input the last time was completely ignored. And I think there's a lot of great people, great ideas, you know, even though people don't all agree on how many people should be in a neighborhood or whatever, there's incredible ideas out of these folks about how we can do this. And we don't all have to agree, but we can all settle on some things, but we just need to have the input.
Okay. Would you be supportive of the concept of, if council were to move forward with the repeal, to then bring forward recommendations on city-initiated redesignation for higher density in specific and appropriate locations?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, that would be welcome.
Okay, yeah, no, that's pretty much all the questions I have. And I don't know if it would interest you to know, but my first daughter was born at the Grace Baptist, or sorry, is it the Grace? No, the Grace Hospital. Grace Hospital.
Oh,
My first daughter. Oops, am I dating myself?
Thank you. Councillor Yule, please.
Mr. Klumpenhauer, I just want to talk about your statement. Where are the next 500,000 people going to live? In your charts, you didn't include the green line. And so I was just wondering, you said that the lines that we do have are like, we probably wouldn't have the ambition to build up around those lines. Have you looked into a model with a green line? Like if we were building out the green line, would we have that capacity to hit those targets?
If you did max also, and the green line and the red line and the blue line. I mean, you saw, so towards the end of that chart, if you go about 800 meters out, even with their existing one, and I definitely don't think the green lines can be built in the next by the time we hit 2 million people. I won't say what green line, but it's coming. I know it's coming. I think even just with that, without the green line, you can hit, close to 1 million people if you go all in on density, you do 800 meters from transit, you do like effectively 100 units per hectare, which means much higher in terms of what you actually build, because you have to account for schools and roads and all these things that you can't build on. So I don't actually think the green line, I could throw the green line in there and send you an updated slide. I don't think you're going to see much in terms of the shape will be the same. Things will slightly shift up. It's not going to solve the conundrum. If you were to project out until when the green line might be finished and those stations might be operational, you probably added another 500,000 people again, 1 million people again. So yeah, I don't think it changes the argument, but certainly could be included. It wasn't a slight on the green line. I just didn't want to distract too much from.
Well, I wouldn't do my job in Ward 3 without bringing up the green line.
Yeah,
so,
of course.
Anyways, that's all.
Thanks.
All right, see you at 9:30 tomorrow.